Hey guys, it's Malcolm here with another installment of Profisee's MDM Bytes, which are short, instructional, how-to centric videos around implementing, managing, launching MDM and data governance. So today I wanted to touch on a subject related to something that's been kind of coming up over and over again in online conversations I'm seeing related to the data mesh. I'm not going to talk a lot today about what is the data mesh and how does it work and how does the mesh interact with governance, or how does the mesh interact with MDM and are there dependencies there. Probably the subject of a separate video. But one of the things I wanted to touch on today was this notion of data ownership. And kind of core to the message of the data message, this notion of kind of decentralized or local ownership, or what is more accurately called domain level ownership. And by that, I assume that what is meant is by the customer domain, the sales and marketing domain, or the finance domain, or the supply chain, or the procurement domain, or these individual business domains that where under a data mesh, ownership of data, and this is a word that I keep seeing over and over again in reference to the data mesh, where ownership is at a local level. And I find through the lens of MDM, Master Data Management, I find the notion of ownership a little curious. Because when we look at MDM and we think about what MDM is, at least what master data is, obviously master data management, but what is master data? Master data is shared data. Master data is data that needs to have consistent definitions and structures and quality rules so that it can be shared, right? So that you have a common lexicon, so that you have a common definition, that you have a common understanding of what this data is, because it's used widely. It's used, by definition, across multiple domains, right? So this notion of MDM being defined at a domain level, you can do that, right? You can actually have master data such as customer or supplier defined at a very, very local level. That's true. But then when it comes to more of a global level, what do you do, right? If you have individual definitions of customer within, let's say, in sales and marketing versus, let's say, finance or accounting, we see this all the time. How customer is defined in a CRM system is different than how customer is defined in an ERP system. It's a common MDM use case, right? What happens when your CEO asks, how many customers do we have? Well, the answer can't be, depends. The answer cannot be, well, depends on the domain. There's two different answers depending on the domain. That can't be the answer. The answer has to be, at that level at least, the answer has to be, we have X customers or Y customers. There can only be one answer if the CEO is asking that question. At an operating level, sure, you can have different answers at a more of a sales and marketing operational level or a finance operational level, but at certain levels of the organization, there can be only one answer. But this is why I find the notion of domain-centric ownership, again, a little curious when it comes to master data. When we're talking specifically about master data, there are multiple owners of master data because by definition it has to be shared widely, right? If you need that single answer of how many customers do we have, you need consensus on how to define a customer. That means that ownership of that data is occurring in multiple places and at multiple levels. And we think about ownership, really how I think about ownership is really across two different things here. One is data governance policy definition, right? Who defines, who owns the data governance policies related to master data, right? So policy definition is one important aspect of ownership. Another important aspect of ownership is policy enforcement or execution of those policies, right? Who's actually making sure that that definition is correct? Who's making sure that that customer record is accurate? Both of these things, whether you're talking about policy definition or policy enforcement, both of these things can be happening at multiple levels of the organization. You can set a policy at a global level, you can set a policy at a local level, and you can be enforcing them at both. This is why this notion of data ownership is really a bit of a misnomer when it comes to master data. When it comes to master data, what you really need is some form of a global data governance organization that is setting an enterprise-wide data governance framework that establishes the rules for what is global versus what is local. Who owns policy definitions at a global level? Who owns policy definitions at a local level? Who owns enforcement at each of those respective levels? When you define that, you have a high-functioning data governance framework and a data governance organization. And that's when you've really kind of defined ownership, right? Because ownership isn't just, oh, who's responsible for the data from kind of a racy model perspective. It really comes down to those two important things, and they both need to be defined. They both need to be managed. And again, when you're talking about master data, there is no one owner of master data. Saying person A or person B is responsible for the customer record is really not the best way to be looking at your master data. You should be looking at it, again, across those two aspects that I was talking about within the context of a broader data governance framework. So I think we should forget the notion of an individual person owning any sort of master data, and think of it more broadly through the lens of policy definition, policy enforcement, and through the lens of some sort of enterprise-wide data governance organization and some enterprise-wide data governance framework. I hope that helps when you're thinking about data ownership from an MDM perspective. I look forward to sharing additional insights in these MDM Bytes sessions in an upcoming video. Thanks, guys.